Zod's Fandom Zone for another Fandom Zone review. And today, I will be going over a interesting film, 21 Bridges. And of course, for this review, as always, I will do a couple of things I always do. You'll hear Zod approves or Zod disapproves my rating system, one being the worst movie of your Earth's history, and the other one, 10, being the greatest thing, preventing Zod from destroying your planet. Now, before we get started, I will go over the overview, the pros, the cons, and then give my overall rating. And I've got to say, this one is an intriguing film that I struggled with and took me a couple hours of just shooting now in order to gather my thoughts of how I felt about this film. So let's jump into this. This story follows the story of Chadwick Boseman's character, who is a cop who essentially seeks out justice for killers who kill cops. Now, this was interesting because I went to Shilling Tomatoes, and the Rotten Tomato meter was at a 47 from critics and a 90 from audience members, signifying to me this movie was going to be different than what I thought it would be, and it surely was. Something happens at the end of the movie that I think is worth checking out, and I'll get to that in a second. But so Chadwick Boseman is on a case. These two people go ham on these cops, and I mean, they are military style. They take out like 8 cops before escaping, and then like kill a shit ton more of cops throughout the night. So my pros are, this story is the typical cop fare, except for it isn't, because there's one component of this story that will keep you in your seat. And it throws a lot of different elements out where you can't quite figure out what's going on, and it works to this benefit. Otherwise, it'd just be another run-in-the-mill, a cop finds out that there's more going on to this simple robbery and blah, blah, blah. And to the Russo brothers' strength, they know how to keep you in the seat. Whether or not the story winds up being good, they put in enough elements for you to want to know more. And that is to the credit of their writing. Now, the other strong thing is Chadwick Boseman. I'm not a fan of Black Panther, although I am a fan of his acting, particularly not in his own movie, but in Civil War. And I felt when he goes into that mode where he's looking for these cop killers, or he's just straight up, there's a couple of scenes in this movie, I don't want to spoil it, but it's pretty brutal. And the way he executes things makes me feel him as a legitimate action hero. Like, some of the scenes, like, and the way he has a certain look, a cold callousness after he shoots someone, where you buy him as this, like, robot Terminator style cop killer hunting machine. And I think it's important for your lead to have that kind of not so much charisma in his line delivery, but charisma as far as his body language. He sucks you in with his intensity, and you want to know what's going on. And in a sense, you want him to be the one to find out what's going on, because he's got an obscured sense of justice that's never explained. And I think that it's a benefit to this movie that he doesn't explain why he shot certain cop killers and things like that. And I found it intriguing, making me even want a sequel to know more about these other people he's hunted down. It was a very stellar setup. Everyone across the board acts good, and props to the two people who play the merciless killers. You could have generic bad guys that are just there to move the story, but there were legitimate scenes where I didn't want the villains to die, and I wasn't necessarily thinking Chadwick Boseman was an asshole. I just saw two opposing forces who essentially could have been on the same side, given what happens. So it was an intriguing dynamic. Very well done. My cons are, at the end of the day, this film still falls into the window dressing of, you know, the cop track down the bad guy kind of genre. And I can't tell you more without giving it away. This might spur me to do a spoilers in order to detail certain scenes. But I can say one thing I appreciated as someone in the military and has fellow police officers as family members. This movie doesn't demonize the villains or the cops. And there's a funny explanation at the end of the movie about the situation. And when you get down to it, it's bad timing from the criminals and the cops. And you'll understand what I mean when you check out the movie. It's really intriguing. And it's almost like a shit happens life moment. Like how things just happen in life and two opposing forces meet unexpectedly and they happen to collide and run into each other, and one directly exposes the other. It was very clever. And this was the hard part I had, because you could say this was a generic cop fare once you get to the ending, but at the same time, the story is still hella intriguing enough to keep me in my seat. And literally there were parts like intense that I grabbed the side of my seat because the action was so intense. I mean, this earned its R rating. There's Chadwick Boseman off some people in the most brutal fashion that made me go, oh shit, man, if they ever gave Black Panther a gun, he'd be a badass. So how do I feel in rating this? I jumped back and forth. I gave Knives Out a 7, and that was based on writing and dialogue. Now, this dialogue isn't as strong, I never thought I'd say that, as Knives Out was. Knives Out had poignant, witty dialogue delivered by great actors, but this has actors you will know and recognize. They're just a B-level talent, and all of them together elevate it to an A. Some lines that should be corny actually came off as kind of badass. And so, I mean, people even legitimately laughed at a cop in particular. You'll recognize him when you see him. So, this is where I grappled with it. But I don't think this movie reaches the heights of an 8, 9, or 10. It's just missing that thing that gives it the X factor. And I don't think it falls into the 5 or the 6 range, because I wouldn't call it mediocre considering how I grabbed my seat. And if you're physically invested, I don't think then that makes for a dull film. So for me, I would rate this movie at a 7.9. And why I say a 7.9 is because I think it is points above Knives Out in the fact that it doesn't have a surprising plot twist, and it doesn't try to make like there's going to be one. It's pretty direct in its delivery, but there is one particular twist that you won't see coming, and the Russos know how to lay that down subtly while making this still what it is, and they know what it is. It's a blunt action movie, cop thriller, and I appreciate them for not trying to see this as some kind of glorious masterpiece, but just making a film, an action film, with some social commentary that swings both ways. I give the Russo brothers credit, and I really think this now speaks to what Endgame and Infinity War was. They are down the middle in this movie. They play it as in the cops aren't bad and the criminals aren't bad, but both do bad things in the name of good. And I found that intriguing because they don't demonize either side. And I think this got a low rating for who the overall bad guy is. And you should watch it just to see who they do, because when I saw it, I said, that's why the critics don't like it. and you'll kind of get it towards about the last 10 minutes of the movie, and you're going to laugh because you'll see exactly why critics don't want to give this thing a good rating. So does Zod approve? If there's nothing out, yeah, Zod approves. If you don't want to see Frozen and you want to skip Ryan Johnson's Knives Out, even out of morbid curiosity, then I'd say this is a good second. I'd definitely see this before it's out of theaters because I think it's an underrated gem, kind of like Bad Times at the El Royale was, you know, it had Jeff Bridges and all those actors, and it was so underrated, and it was a great movie. And I think this is not a great movie, but a really decent action film that got buried and released with a terrible slate. I think that had it not been released so close to Frozen and, you know, so close to Joker and all that, that it could have edged out its own little spot. I don't think Chadwick Boseman quite has that star power yet to be the draw of his own movie. And I don't think the Russo brothers, unless they're attached to Marvel, have the draw to bring in the crowd. And it's a shame because they actually do some pretty solid writing. There's some solid action. And if you want to see a good, at times gritty, brutal movie that has something interesting to say, go see this film. Go check out 21 Bridges. Zod approves with a 7.9. I wish I could give it that 8 or 9 slot, but it just falls a tiny bit flat from being up there with the good slash great titles we've got. So anyways, this has been another review. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. And as always, remember the only rule here in the fandom zone: kneel before Zod.